But the question, of course, that comes up here is, how do you get university leadership to do more than just issue the boilerplate statement of we support free expression? So, an interesting article that crossed my radar in the New York Times, actually, and I think it made a very nuanced point. As you all know, next generation of scientists are educated at universities, and hence the reason I talk about things going on at universities as much as I talk about things going on in science. Um, and this article caught my attention because I think it's a very nuanced piece that points out a very good problem with not a good problem, but a very important problem with the current campus climate. Um, and so I thought it would be interesting to read through it and point out a few things um, from the author here that I thought would be fantastic to point out to and add a little nuance to. And one of the things that I want to get into with this is I think she makes a very good point that the current campus climate, the way it is, there's lots of big hullabaloo. And I know the conservatives out there are not going to like me saying this. There's a big hullabaloo from the conservative end about how conservatives are censored on campus and what have you, and all this kind of nonsense. Um, well, not nonsense. I mean, there's some legitimacy perhaps to it, but the student here writing this guest essay for the New York Times, which I give New York Times credit where it's due, also that they still ran um, with this piece. I think this is fantastic that they've run this, and I think it makes a very good point that issues of being self censoring when you're afraid to speak your mind on something because of piles on Twitter or piles on in a classroom where you're the only one, and you do think, or you either perceive or it is literally so, um, that you are being chastised for an opinion, however important it is. And yeah, you can roll your eyes and things like that, but when it degenerates into ad hominems and ostracization from your community over an opinion that might be somebody who disagrees but isn't necessarily abhorrent, there's a difference. An utterly abhorrent opinion might have a whole lot of people walk away from you. Um, but one that is reasonable, but just is there a disagreement, doesn't warrant that. And so I think this would be a good thing here. And as always, folks are welcome to comment their thoughts, any of their thoughts on the whole video here. Each week, I seek out the office hours of a philosophy department professor willing to discuss with me complex ethical questions raised by her course on gender and sexuality. We keep our voices lowered as if someone might overhear us. Hushed voices and anxious looks dictate so many conversations on campus at the University of Virginia, where I'm finishing up my senior year. Congratulations. It's going to be quite an accomplishment to be graduating from college. A friend lowers her voice to lament the ostracizing of a student who said something well meaning but mildly offensive during a club's diversity training. Another friend shuts his bedroom door when I mention a lecture defending Thomas Jefferson from contemporary criticism. His roommate might hear us, he explains. You notice a problem with that? This is anecdotal, for admittedly, because she's describing stories that have happened with her in her sphere there at UVA. But why should you be afraid that someone else is going to hear what you say? That is the concerning part of this campus climate. It's very, very concerning that that this is the kind of thing that she's recording. Now, obviously, this is anecdotal. This is her voice. So it cannot necessarily be it's not necessarily representative of all. But it's disturbing that it's like that nonetheless, that students have to feel like they cannot say something or lower their voice to talk about, wow, it's not right that this other student's being ostracized for saying something that was mildly offensive but not intended to be. Um, as somebody jumped down me to say, intentions don't matter for some of these things, which is a very poor way of going about it, because intentions do very much matter. You might not be intending to offend somebody. You might not be intending to cause harm with whatever you're saying, but yet sometimes if some are offended by it, then you've done harm rather than the intention of causing the offense. Anyway, not right. And I admit to myself, for where I work, I've done the same thing. Actually, I've not spoken my mind on everything that I've always wanted to say. I'm getting better about that in terms of stepping up and standing up and speaking my mind in terms of my own workplace, but it is still hesitant to do that. Let's put it that way. I went to college to learn from my professors and peers. I welcomed an environment that champions intellectual diversity and rigorous disagreement. Instead, my college experience has been defined by strict ideological conformity. Students of all political persuasions hold back in class discussions, in friendly conversations on social media, from saying from saying what we really think. Forgot the comma. Even as a liberal who has attended abortion rights protests and written about standing up to racism, I sometimes feel afraid to fully speak my mind. Yeah, been there, done that. Bravo there. So I want to say you're a senior now, so you'd be 2022, so you came in in fall of 2018 or 2017. I may not be doing the math right. It's been a long day. So that's relatively recently. I will say for me, who I finished my undergraduate in 2008, and my PhD in 2016, so it's been in the academic circles for a while, and I noticed it myself in this slow degradation and erosion of being able to speak your mind freely on certain things. At the time, for me, though, I didn't give much weight to it when I was doing my PhD, because it's just like crunching through my dissertation. I gotta get this bleep done. So that's kind of, it's kind of hard to stand up and think about that when you're, facing down the gauntlet of getting your dissertation done and being ready for your dissertation defense, those kinds of things. But I can understand what she's talking about if it's been in the last 4 years, when she's been at college and observing this. I did not have that same experience, but I saw it coming. Let's put it that way. In the classroom, backlash for unpopular opinions is so commonplace that many students have stopped voicing them, sometimes fearing lower grades if they don't censor themselves. According to a 2021 survey administered by College Pulse of over 37,000 students at 159 colleges, 80% of students self-censor at least some of the time. 48% of undergraduate students describe themselves as somewhat uncomfortable or very uncomfortable with expressing their views on a controversial topic during classroom discussions. At UVA, 57% of those surveyed feel that way. This is not a point on her, what she's saying here. This is a point on some of the surveys in here, what have you. And I said this with the Heterodox Academy Campus Expression Survey the other day. A lot of them say, like, campus climate, but do these surveys reflecting willingness to discuss in the classroom? And those are two different things, because you could be not willing to discuss it in the classroom, but you could be more willing to discuss it in campus, or you're afraid to discuss it in the classroom because of the environment on the campus as a whole. And those are not necessarily exactly the same thing. And so I would be curious if somebody's just like, I'm afraid to express my views in a classroom versus I'm afraid to express my views on campus. That said, I can understand why the focus on classrooms, because for a lot of students, most of their time when they're at college is in the classroom, or connecting with people that they have in classes and classroom for either they become friends or there's group projects or any number of different things. So I can understand the focus on that, but that's just a point on the survey. It's not a point on what the student is saying. I'm wondering if this is actually the FIRE survey or not. I don't think it is, but I gotta check, because I know FIRE doesn't do that one alone. They do that with a couple of different groups working with them, and I think one of them is College Pulse, but I can't remember. Somebody can fact check on that one for me. When a class discussion goes poorly for me, I can tell. During feminist theory class in my sophomore year, I said that non-Indian women can criticize suti, I probably didn't pronounce that right, a historical practice of ritual suicide by Indian widows. This idea seems acceptable for academic discussion, but to many of my classmates it was objectionable. The room felt tense. I saw people shift in their seats. Someone got angry, and then everyone seemed to get angry. After the professor tried to move the discussion along, I still felt uneasy. I became a little less likely to speak up again and a little less trusting of my own thoughts. That's a scary thing, to feel like you can't even have your own thoughts involved. That is actually a very scary, 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 scary thing to see from a student. So, just a point of note here is like, I don't blame you for feeling scared of that. I don't blame you. With that one, I really don't. But we have to try to speak up on these different things. I was shaken, but also determined not to silence myself. Still, the disdain of my fellow students stuck with me. I was a welcomed member of the group, and then I wasn't. Throughout the semester, I saw similar reactions in response to other students' ideas. I heard fewer classmates speak up. Eventually, our discussions became monotonous echo chambers, absent rich debate and rigor. We became mired in socially safe ideas, which is not a good thing to be mired in necessarily. Yeah, that's not a good thing to be mired in. Is just the socially safe and what have you. And expresses a lot, because there's a lot of different surveys and anecdotal information. Well, there's a lot of different surveys straight up that acknowledge that a lot of students are seriously afraid, and staff and faculty too, for that matter, are seriously afraid to speak their mind on controversial ideas. And that's pretty dang concerning, because science itself requires viewpoint diversity to be able to get at the truth. It does not require conformity. Ideological conformity does not usually end well with respect to scientific practice. See Trofim Lysenko is the most extreme example of that. And I said the most extreme example of that, for that matter. Being criticized, even strongly, during a difficult discussion does not trouble me. We need more classrooms full of an energetic debate, not fewer. But when criticism transforms into public shaming, it stifles learning, and that is the key. Because I know I flipped through some of the comments on this article before I came in here, and a bunch of them were like, "Well, you gotta get used to it being criticized and da 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 da." Well, we'll point you back to this whole section right here. Yeah, criticism's okay. It's when it becomes a pile-on of people who all entirely disagree with you and will go with moral attacks and ad hominems, and like you're shameful for even thinking about that. That's where it becomes a problem in here. And that's not to say you don't have the right. You have absolutely, of course, because the First Amendment, right to speak your mind, and with that particular aspect, also you have the right to and the freedom to associate or disassociate from whomever you will. And so there is that too. But she is quite correct, I think, that criticism is good, but when it suddenly transitions into dogpiling on and public shaming, yeah, that does keep people from learning, because they don't want to engage in different things. They don't want to explore if they can't talk about some of these ideas. And that cuts both right and left. And that's the critique I think she has here, in that, this doesn't just hurt conservatives. I'm sorry for the conservatives who might be annoyed at that. No. The idea that you cannot speak your mind freely on something ever, whether coming from a right or a left perspective, is not good. It hurts everybody in those kinds of things, and you need the ideological diversity. Professors have noticed a shift in their classrooms. Brad Wilcox, a UVA sociology professor, told me that he believes that two factors have caused self-censorship's pervasiveness. First, students are afraid of being called out on social media by their peers. He said, second, the dominant messages students hear from faculty, administrators, and staff are progressive ones, so they feel an implicit pressure to conform to those messages in classroom and campus conversations and debates. It's an interesting observation right here from the professor she's talking to. And I think that's really fascinating, in the sense that undergraduate students, when you're coming in, you're 17, you're 18. You're 17 turning 18. And you hit your 20s right as you're getting out, most of the time. But you've also come from the K through 12 environment where you are taught this is the authority figure, this is the teacher is the authority figure, they always have the right answer. And so it's quite a break from the idea of you were looking at the teacher for a long time as an authority figure who had the right answer, and going into a college environment where one should expect that you can engage in discussions that don't necessarily end up in a right answer. But you get to start talking about logic and argumentation and the whole works in there. And some of those things you don't necessarily end up in a right answer, especially when you're talking about controversial ideas, but you got to learn the logic and the argumentation, how to think about it, critical thinking, all those other kinds of things when you come out of college, when you come out of high school from an environment that's very different to what you're going into in college. Some students are ready for it and some students are not. And I have often wondered with this, students hearing from faculty, administrators, and staff who are authority figures, if that pressure comes from the notion that these are the people with authority, these are the people with the right answers, therefore I have to mouth it along even if I don't agree. I wonder that, and I wonder how to break that kind of thing here. And that's why, actually, I'm a big fan of the idea of when students get out of high school, they shouldn't go into college right away. It should be like 2 or 3 years where you're working a job, or you're working, or you're helping out in a service, or something like that, where you are working and interacting with people in the real world, getting some soft skills, getting some critical thinking, learning how to do some of these things in outside the bubble of academia, and then go to college when you're ready in your, say, early 20s, rather than doing these other things. There's a whole lot of significant things that would have to be changed to make that economically feasible. And I'm also a big fan, as I said this in another video, of financial training for students before they make that decision to go to college and get student loans. Because that is the choice that students often make. So I would be all for that, to make sure that students are financially literate before they decide to take out what is at that point the biggest financial decision of their lives, going to college. The consequences for saying something outside the norm can be steep. I met Stephen Weissek at our debate club. He's an outgoing, formidable first-year debater who often stays after meetings to help clean up. He's also conservative. At UVA, where only 9% of students surveyed describe themselves as strong Republican or weak Republican, that puts him in the minority. He told me that he has often straight up lied about his beliefs to avoid conflict. Sometimes it's at a party, sometimes it's in an a cappella rehearsal, and sometimes it's in the classroom. When politics come up, I just kind of go on survival mode, he said. I tense up a lot more because I got to think very carefully about how I word things. It's very anxiety inducing. And I mean, you should take some care, certainly, with what you're saying. At the same time, you shouldn't feel like you have to lie. And that's very, after a while, that can be very much of a drain on your soul to be that dishonest. Not quite simply because you don't want to deal with the argument, but to be that dishonest sometimes can be very soul sucking. Which I hope you don't end up doing that, you know. One of the things I haven't seen colleges teach very well, and this would probably be very helpful if they did, would be healthy conflict management. They don't teach that in the midst of a lot of things for college students. I don't offer that too much, I don't think. I know that's in professional development for like employees at different universities a lot of times, but not so much for students, which would actually be a healthy thing. It's like healthy conflict management skills, and discussion skills. Those would be very useful, but you know, it feels like it's always a bit of soul sucking to say you're gonna have to lie about your beliefs. This anxiety affects not just conservatives. I spoke with Abby Sachs, a progressive fourth-year student. She said she experienced a pylon during a class discussion about sexism in media. She disagreed with her professor, who she said called Captain Marvel a feminist film. Ms. Sachs commented that she felt the film emphasized the title character's physical strength instead of her internal conflict and emotions. She said this seemed to frustrate her professor. Her classmates noted noticed, rather. It was just a succession of people, one after the other, each vehemently disagreeing with me, she told me. Miss Sachs felt overwhelmed. Everyone adding on to each other was kind of energized the room, like everyone wanted to be part of the group with the correct opinion. She said, the experience, she said, made me not want to go to class again. While Miss Sachs did continue to attend the class, she participated less frequently. Okay. Here's Here's where I go back to the thing I was saying about the authority figure. The professor in that situation might be well thought of by the students, the undergraduate students attending, as the authority figure. Therefore, the professor being annoyed, um, thinking that this is, right, who's setting what the right opinion is here? The authority figure, perhaps, in the situation. I'm speculating right now, and this is a great example. That, that's why, well, this professor is the authority figure. How could you challenge the authority figure? But that is the skill you're supposed to learn in college, and be able to challenge professors and what have you all the time on their thoughts and their things. You may not always get a reply. You may get situations like this, but be able to challenge them, and that's what you should be learning. And it's disappointing that so many students, at least in this anecdotal thing, it's anecdotal, felt that they felt more like going with what they viewed as the correct opinion on this than actually discussing it. Other campuses also struggle with this. Quote, viewpoint diversity is no longer considered a sacred core value of higher education. Sam Abrams, a political professor at Sarah Lawrence College, told me. He felt this firsthand in 2018 after he published an opinion essay in the Times criticizing what he viewed as a lack of ideological diversity among university administrators as office door was vandalized. Student professors demanded his tenure be reviewed. While their attempts were unsuccessful, Dr. Abrams remains dissatisfied with fellow faculty members' reactions. In response to the incident, only 27% of faculty members signed a statement supporting free expression, less than 10% of the college's faculty. Dr. Abrams said the environment on today's campuses differs from his undergraduate experience. I share that same sentiment. He recalled late-night debates with fellow students that sometimes left him feeling hurt, but led to, quote, the ecstasy of having my mind opened up to new ideas. He worries that self-censorship threatens this environment and argues that college administrators in particular, quote, enforce and create a culture of obedience and fear that has chilled speech. One could argue that, because I think one of the things that came up from the Heterodox Academy survey was that some 60-some-odd% of students felt that the campus did not create a culture for actually having, intellectual diversity and rigorous debate. The solution to self-censorship cannot merely be to encourage more students to be more courageous. Is it brave to risk your social standing by saying something unpopular? Yes. Is it reasonable to ask college students, the 48% of us who feel uncomfortable sharing our views, to solve this problem independently? No. And believe me, I tried. I protested a university policy about the size of signs allowed on dorm room doors by mounting a large sign of the First Amendment. It was removed by the university. In response, I worked with administrators to create a less restrictive policy. As a columnist for the university paper, I implored students to embrace free expression. In response, I lost friends and faced a Twitter pile-on. I have been brave, and yet without support, the activism of a few students like me changes little. Our universities cannot change our social interactions, but they can foster appreciation for ideological diversity in academic environments. Universities must do more than make public statements supporting free expression. We need a campus culture that prioritizes ideological diversity and strong policies that protect expression in the classroom. Universities should refuse to cancel controversial speakers or cave to unreasonable student demands. They should encourage professors to reward intellectual diversity and nonconformism in classroom discussions. And more urgently, they should discard restrictive speech codes and bias response teams that pathologize ideological conflict. We cannot experience the full benefits of a university education without having our ideas challenged, yet challenged in ways that allow us to grow. As Ms. Sachs told me, we need to have conversations about these issues without punishing each other for our opinions. That is a very correct thing here. We do need to have these conversations without punishing each other for them, for opinions. And again, criticism being different from public shaming in this action here. So I applaud her for being as brave as she has been. and I applaud her. This is a wonderfully nuanced thing, and she makes a very good point that it goes ignored on the right in particular, is that there's also a lot of students who are left of center who run into these situations where they're not allowed to speak. Well, I wouldn't say not allowed to speak, but speak and then suddenly lose a lot of their friends or end up publicly shamed over it. And I can understand that concern. Again, there's the freedom to associate or disassociate with whomever you choose. That's part and parcel right there. And there needs to be more. But the question, of course, that comes up here is, how do you get university leadership to do more than just issue the boilerplate statement of we support free expression? And I think that comes in a couple of different ways. For one thing, the students soon to be an alumni of the University of Virginia, don't donate to your university. Don't donate any money to the Alumni Association. Don't donate any money to the university when you're finished. And explain to them, this is why. You've not done a good job with this. I'm annoyed at this. I had a horrible time in my college education because of this. Don't donate. And encourage any other students that feel the same way to not donate also. Students on campus need to find and link up with professors who are supportive of free expression. A good place to start looking for that is to see if any of your professors are listed members of the Heterodox Academy or anything similar, because the Heterodox Academy Heterodox Academy members have a commitment to supporting viewpoint diversity. So if there's any of them that are there that do that, then they are ones who can help you figure out how to navigate this and put the pressure on university leadership from the college level. Parents is the same thing. Consider, like the fire free speech rankings, that decision when you're working with your soon-to-be college student to decide where they want to go to school, because if that school is not supportive of viewpoint diversity as shown by, I don't know, the Fire 2021 college free speech rankings or anything like that, then don't send them to that school. Deny them the tuition dollars. Things like that. I think there's a number of different ways to go about it. In terms of changing the culture on campus itself, one of the things that needs to happen, I think, and I said this a few times, is getting away from looking at people as members of groups, based on whatever identities are of the norm here, because that I do think really does fragment people and enforce the idea that you want to be part of the group with the correct opinion, right? But start thinking of people as human and as this individual whole and complete self that is far more than just what those different identities are that is popular. That is the kind of thing that needs to change on campus, I think. And one of the ways to do that is, I think I really like what I've seen with Bucknell University's Open Discourse Coalition when I've seen it, in that they have two very different speakers that end up chatting and talking about anything. But I'd like to pair that with something else I saw. I think it was Texas Tech that did a thing called Science by the Glass, where, you'd have somebody chatting on a science topic in a bar. And afterwards, everybody would be around having a drink, of course, if you're of legal drinking age, right? And chatting and getting to know each other. I think that immensely does help if people do get the chance to know each other in terms of breaking this culture. And that has happened. That has broken. One thing I think social media has been really bad for is fragmenting us away from actually having in-person relationships, rather than the thing behind the computer that is the persona that you can easily attack because you don't think they're that's just another persona at the computer screen, rather than actually having the person in front of you that you can know and recognize they're just as human as you are. So that's my thoughts. So author, if you get to see this, I'd be thrilled to chat with you at some point. That's it for right now. Oh, and also congratulations on your upcoming graduation. Good on you. It's great to graduate from college, right? I wish you all great things in terms of where you go and end up in the future. That's it for now. If you like this video, hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video thoughts, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all the good jazz, and don't forget, scrolling along the bottom down there is the locals link. You can join in locals, and of course you get access to the things behind the scene, like my exclusive live stream for the Thursday study review the Philosophical Friday, and a few other things that I'm starting to stick only up there for locals members. Like, I'm thinking on something related to some of the issues of resiliency on campus here soon that will be exclusively for our locals folks. Until next time, I'm Adrienne, and I hope you all stay curious.